When the man leading Canada walked into Trinity College in Dublin on the 13th of June, he did not come to flatter the United States, and he did not come to ask Donald Trump for anything. He came to say the opposite. He told a room in Ireland's oldest university that middle powers should stop competing for favor with Washington, that they have another option entirely. And the line traveled around the world before the day was over. Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, chose Ireland as the stage, chose the eve of a major summit as the timing, and chose a message that cut straight against the idea that smaller nations must line up and plead for a seat at the American table. So what did he actually say? Why did he say it in Dublin, of all places? And what does it mean as the leaders of the world's largest economies prepare to gather? Stay with me, because this one is bigger than a single speech. Let me take you to the room first, because the setting matters as much as the words. Carney was wrapping up a weekend that had already taken him across Europe, and the Dublin stop was the final beat before the summit that everyone in the diplomatic world had circled on their calendars. He stood in front of an audience at Trinity College, a place that carries centuries of history, and he framed the entire moment as a choice. His words were direct. He said that in a world of great power rivalry, middle powers have a choice: to compete for favor or to combine to create a third path with impact. Read that again slowly, because every part of it is deliberate. He is not naming Canada as a small country begging for scraps. He is naming Canada as one of many capable nations that on their own may feel they have to chase the approval of the biggest player in the room, but together can write a different story altogether. Now, I want to be precise about who he was talking about, because this is the part that gives the speech its edge. The biggest player in the room, the great power whose favor everyone supposedly competes for, is the United States, currently led by Donald Trump. Carney did not pretend otherwise. The framing of middle powers choosing not to beg, not to scramble for goodwill, not to bend their policies to win a friendly word from Washington lands very differently in the current moment than it would have a few years ago. The relationship between Canada and the United States has been tense. Trade has been a flashpoint, and the broader Western alliance has spent a great deal of energy trying to read the mood in Washington. So when the Canadian Prime Minister stands in Dublin and tells an audience that there is a third path, a path that does not run through the front door of the White House asking permission, that is not a throwaway remark. That is a thesis. And he chose to deliver it on the eve of the summit, which made it impossible to ignore. Here is what I find most interesting, and it is the part that separates a slogan from a strategy. Carney did not stop at the rhetoric. He backed the whole idea with hard math, the kind of numbers that turn a nice phrase into an argument. He pointed out that Canada and the European Union together represent a combined population more than twice that of the United States. Stick with that for a second. More than double. He went further. He said the two together have a similarly sized economy, meaning the combined economic weight of Canada and the EU stands shoulder to shoulder with the American economy rather than cowering beneath it. And then he reached for the number that really sharpens the point. He said the collective defense budget of Canada and the EU is twice that of China's. Twice. That is the figure that reframes the whole conversation, because defense spending is so often the measure people use to decide who counts as serious and who does not. What Carney was doing with those numbers is something every good negotiator understands. He was changing the perception of leverage. The classic story of a middle power is a country that is too small to set the agenda, too dependent on a larger partner to take risks, and therefore stuck reacting to whatever the giant decides. Carney is rejecting that story. His argument is that the smallness is an illusion created by looking at each country alone. Take Canada by itself, and yes, it is one nation with a certain population and a certain budget. But combine it with like-minded allies, partner with nations that share its values and its interests, and suddenly the arithmetic flips. He said smaller nations can multiply their strength by partnering with like-minded allies. And the math he laid out is the proof of concept. You are no longer a junior partner asking for favors. You are a bloc with a population, an economy, and a defense capacity that commands attention on its own terms. The phrase that keeps echoing for me is the idea of a counterweight. Carney's framing casts Canada and EU cooperation not as a backup plan, not as a consolation prize for nations that cannot get what they want from Washington, but as a genuine counterweight in a world that is increasingly defined by rivalry between great powers. And notice how carefully balanced his picture is. He is not telling anyone to turn against the United States. He is not calling for a break, a rupture, or a confrontation. He is simply saying that there is more than one way to be powerful, more than one center of gravity, and that nations who feel pulled to compete for favor have the option to combine instead. That is a profoundly different posture than the one we have grown used to hearing from leaders of mid-sized democracies. But I promised you that this trip was bigger than a single speech, and here is where it gets concrete. Because while the words in Trinity College were the headline, the visit on the 13th of June also produced real, tangible results, the kind that outlast any quote. Canada and Ireland agreed to work together across a set of fields that tell you exactly where both countries see their future. They agreed to cooperate on artificial intelligence. They agreed to cooperate on pharmaceuticals and biotechnology. And they agreed to cooperate on food security. Each of those areas is a pillar of the modern economy. And each one is a place where smaller, advanced nations can punch far above their weight if they pool their talent and their research. Take artificial intelligence first, because Carney specifically highlighted it. He pointed to what he called complementary AI strategies between Canada and Ireland. The word complementary is doing a lot of work there. It means the two countries are not duplicating each other or competing for the same narrow slice of the industry. It means their strengths fit together, that what one lacks, the other can supply, and that by aligning their approaches, they create something more capable than either could build alone. That is the middle power thesis applied to the most important technology of our time. Instead of each nation trying separately to keep pace with the giants of the field, they coordinate, they share, and they amplify. Then there is the agreement on pharmaceuticals and biotechnology. And this is where the trip produced one of its most striking commitments. Carney spoke about plans for a regenerative medicine hub in Ireland. Regenerative medicine is one of the frontiers of modern science, the work of repairing, replacing, and regrowing damaged tissue and cells. And building a dedicated hub for it is the kind of long-term investment that shapes an economy for decades. It is not a press release that fades by next week. It is infrastructure, it is jobs, it is research capacity, and it is a signal that the partnership between these two countries is meant to be built on foundations, not just photographs. When you connect that to the cooperation on food security, you start to see the shape of the whole picture. AI, biotech and medicine, and the security of the food supply, technology, health, and the basics of survival. These are the things nations care about most. And Canada and Ireland chose to link arms across all three. And here is a number that brings the economic relationship into sharp focus. Irish exports to Canada have nearly quadrupled since 2018. Quadrupled. In just a handful of years, the flow of Irish goods heading across the Atlantic to Canada has grown to roughly 4 times what it was. That is not a relationship treading water. That is a relationship accelerating, and it gives the new agreements a running start rather than a standing one. When two countries are already trading at that pace and then sit down to add cooperation in AI, in biotech, in food, you are watching a partnership that has both momentum behind it and runway ahead of it. The deals announced on the 13th of June are not the beginning of something from scratch. They are the next chapter of a story that has been building quietly for years. Now let me pull back and add the layer that gives this whole visit its emotional weight. Because the numbers and the strategy only tell you part of why this mattered. As I covered earlier, this trip carried something personal, something symbolic. And it is the kind of detail that explains why the Dublin stop was chosen with such care. This was the first visit by a Canadian Prime Minister to Ireland in nearly a decade, nearly 10 years. Think about what that means. Two countries with deep historical ties, with shared language, with overlapping values and tangled family histories that stretch back generations, had gone almost a full decade without a visit at this level. So when Carney arrived, the visit itself sent a message before he opened his mouth. It said, this relationship matters again. It said, Ireland is not an afterthought on the way to bigger meetings. It said Canada is investing attention, not just trade figures, in this bond. That is why I keep coming back to the word symbolism, because the Dublin stop neatly packaged symbolism and substance in a way that does not happen by accident. On the symbolic side, you have the first visit in nearly 10 years, the choice of Trinity College as the venue, the historic resonance of a Canadian leader standing on Irish soil and talking about partnership between capable democracies. And on the substance side, you have the concrete agreements, the AI cooperation, the regenerative medicine hub, the work on pharmaceuticals and biotech and food security, the trade relationship that has nearly quadrupled. Symbolism without substance is just a nice photo. Substance without symbolism is just paperwork. Carney managed to deliver both in a single day, and that combination is exactly what made the stop so effective. So why does the timing matter so much? Why does it matter that all of this happened on the eve of the summit? Because everything about the Dublin visit was clearly designed to feed into what came next. Heading into the 15th of June, Carney was preparing to carry a theme into the gathering of the world's major economies, the meeting of the leaders often grouped together as the most powerful industrial democracies. And the theme is diversification. That is the word that ties the entire trip together. Diversification means not putting all your eggs in one basket. It means a country like Canada deciding that its prosperity and its security should not hang entirely on the mood of one partner, however large that partner is. It means building multiple strong relationships, deepening ties with Europe, reinforcing the bond with Ireland, and creating that third path Carney described in Trinity College. When you hold the speech and the agreements side by side, the strategy becomes obvious. The speech told the world the philosophy, that middle powers should combine rather than compete for favor. The agreements with Ireland showed the world the philosophy in action. Real cooperation in the fields that define the future between two democracies that share so much already. And the timing, landing right before the summit, made sure that Carney would walk into that room not as a leader hoping to be noticed by the biggest power present, but as a leader arriving with a thesis, with allies, and with proof that the third path is more than a phrase. He was building the argument in public, step by step, so that by the time the summit opened, the diversification message would already be in the air. Let me put the relationships in their proper frame one more time, because I want to be clear about the geometry of all this. On one side, you have the United States under Donald Trump, the great power whose favor, in the old story, everyone scrambles to win. On another side, you have China, the rival great power, the one whose defense budget Carney used as a yardstick to show how much weight Canada and the EU carry together. And in between, you have the middle powers, Canada among them, and the European Union as a partner, and Ireland as the specific, vivid example of what cooperation can look like. Carney's entire pitch is that the middle does not have to be weak. The middle does not have to choose between bowing to one giant or fearing the other. The middle, if it combines, becomes its own center of strength. That is the worldview he carried into Dublin, and that is the worldview he intended to carry forward. There is something worth noticing in how restrained the whole message was, because restraint is part of why it worked. Carney did not insult anyone. He did not pick a fight with Washington, and he did not declare any kind of break. He simply offered an alternative calmly and with numbers to back it. That tone is itself strategic. A loud confrontation would have made headlines for a day and created friction that could backfire. A quiet, confident reframing of where power actually lies is far harder to argue against and far more durable. He let the math do the provoking. More than twice the population, a similarly sized economy, twice the defense budget of China. You do not need to raise your voice when the figures speak that loudly on their own. And I think that is the real takeaway from the 13th of June. It was a single day in a single city, but it managed to compress an entire foreign policy vision into one visit, a message that smaller nations have a choice. A set of agreements that turned the message into action, a trade relationship already racing ahead, a historic first visit in nearly a decade that signaled renewed commitment, and a clear runway into the summit where the diversification theme would take center stage. Dublin was not a detour. Dublin was the launch pad. By the time Carney left Trinity College, the line about middle powers not competing for favor had already gone global, exactly as intended, and the substance underneath it was ready to be carried into the most important meeting of the week. The question now is how far the idea can travel. A speech, even a memorable one, is only as strong as the follow-through behind it. The agreements with Ireland give the vision a foundation. The trade figures give it momentum, and the symbolism gives it heart. Whether the third path Carney described becomes a lasting feature of how middle powers operate, or whether it remains a striking moment for one June afternoon in Dublin, will depend on what happens in the rooms after the cameras leave. But for now, the message is out there, the numbers are on the table, and the leader of Canada has made his choice clear: not to compete for favor, to combine for impact. Thank you so much for watching our coverage of Mark Carney's message in Ireland and the path he is carrying toward the summit. If a clear look at the stories shaping our world is what you are after, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you never miss the next update as this story and others continue to unfold. I will see you in the next one.